Good afternoon, Highland. Glad we could come together and study God's Word. We are continuing our sort of a mini series, if you would, for the rest of this month, uh, being that this is the last Sunday, and we want to connect with the last lesson that we explored a few Sundays ago on fear. And we defined fear and the problems that it causes, and it keeps us from moving forward, specifically as this little series is bringing up, as it relates to us moving forward with God, moving forward with Jesus. And there is a story within the New Testament and the gospel accounts in the book of Matthew that really shows us or defines for us what it means to overcome fear. But then at the same time, it shows us what happens when we give into fear. And so that story comes from Matthew 14, verses 22 through 33. And we know this story as Jesus walking on water, one of the miracles that he performed to show or demonstrate that he is truly the Son of God. So as we're looking into this lesson, again, we get this really great picture of what it means to overcome fear, but then at the same time, what it means to give in to fear. And the fact of the matter is that even though there are moments in our lives that we overcome fear, we may be reminded that that fear exists, and it may cause us to move in the midst, or to freeze in the midst of our movement. And so remember last week I showed you that at the beginning, as we were introducing the lesson, I showed you that great movements in our nation's history and movements throughout the world happened because people were willing to move despite the massive fear. I mean, you think about civil rights and the fact that during the 50s and 60s and even other times, not just the 50s and 60s, but especially during that time, you were at risk at losing your life. There were even protesters, demonstrators, who were leaders of the movement that were assassinated. So there was a huge risk, and I'm sure for us that would be a gigantic fear. But these people who allowed us to continue to fight for equal rights, they championed this and move forward, and because of them, we can still champion that even today. So, great story, great example here in Matthew 14, 22 through 33. So let's read this passage or these passages together. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." So he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink, and he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, And those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So, if you grew up in the church, or you've been in the church long enough to know this story, know this account, right? So, what's happening? So, this is after Jesus has fed the 5,000, taught them the gospel message, or the message that he's proclaiming, that he is the Son of God. After this, he dismisses the crowds and he sends the disciples away on a boat into the Sea of Galilee. And while they are on the boat, Jesus goes up to the mountain and he basically secludes himself, and he's up there and he's praying. So there were moments that even Jesus needed breaks from the crowd. But while he was in those breaks, he was praying to God, communicating with him, and probably trying to replenish his drive to continue his ministry. Remember, he's 100% human. He's living the human experience. So any human is going to be tired and fatigued from all the activity that they would be doing, like Jesus here. So while Jesus is up in the mountain, there are these storms that are happening. And so the disciples, the apostles here, are the waters beaten upon the ship, and so they're probably really petrified by this storm, and probably think that they're eventually going to, the boat's going to flip, they're going to eventually drown. I mean, so you think about all of these fears and anxieties are happening in their minds, right? So Jesus waits for some time and then eventually does what? Walks towards them on the water. So can you imagine that they are pretty deep in the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus walks from shore and walks towards them. And so while this is happening, they see Jesus. But notice this. There's a storm happening around Jesus as he is walking on water. And as this is happening, the disciples see him, and they're what? Our key words here. They are terrified, and they are crying out in fear. Now, they obviously had some type of superstitious beliefs, because they say it's a ghost, right? Who are you going to call? But they're terrified. They're in fear. Hence our little mini-series here on this idea of fear. Fear causes us to freeze. Fear causes us to not move forward. And oftentimes when we get into these places of fear, we panic. There's anxiety, frustration. So many things are going on in the mind of these disciples. But here it is. They are terrified and they are fearful of something that they're not grasping. They're not understanding. But what does Jesus tell them? It is me. So here they are in this storm. They see this figure approaching them. They don't know who it is. They're in fear. They're terrified. But this storm is happening around them. So as Jesus is walking towards them, and they are in fear, and Jesus tells them, don't worry. Don't be afraid. Take this to heart. Verse 27, for it is me. Now, we know who then responds to what Jesus says. Peter, who is the great responder, right? He seems to always answer the questions that Jesus has, or make statements based on statements that Jesus says. And so Peter basically tells Jesus, all right, I hear your voice. I'm not quite certain that it's you, but if it is you, then allow me to walk on water. Now, what a request, right? The fact of the matter is that something is walking on water, and this something is saying, I am Jesus. I hear his voice, and I know it's his voice. I'm not quite sure, but you know what? If it is Jesus, then I should be able to walk on water. I don't know if I would have um, thought that. Like, if that's Jesus, then I'm going to ask him to walk on water. I don't know if that would have been my reaction, but that was Peter's reaction. If it is you, let me walk on water. Why? Because Peter understands that Jesus has abilities that aren't natural. Jesus has these abilities and that he can empower me to do this. So Peter has that kind of faith. And so what does Jesus tell him? All right, Peter, get out of the boat and walk towards me. And Peter begins to do this. Peter's response is the same response that we should have towards fear. He knew what Jesus could do. He was aware of the power of Christ. So he knew what Jesus can do, first and foremost. Second, he trusted that Jesus could do it. He trusts that Jesus can do it. And then thirdly, he challenged his faith. So he didn't know that it was, he wasn't completely 100% certain that it was Jesus, but he knew, he trusted, and he challenged. And that's really the formula for moving past our fears. It's the formula that allows us to move forward to Jesus. And here is Peter doing that very thing in a very physical way. He knew, he trusted, he challenged. He knew, he trusted, he challenged. That is the formula. I know that God can get me through this. And I know he has the ability to get me through this. And I completely trust in him. And I challenge, despite my failures, I challenge my belief. It's the formula for getting through fear. It's the formula of faith. It's the formula of faith. His faith was big enough for him to get out and walk to Jesus. And again, I think that's the challenge that we face when it comes to fear. It's realizing that our faith needs to be big enough. But the question is truly our faith big enough to walk towards Jesus despite all the storms that we're facing? Despite all the challenges that we face, that we look towards? Can we keep our eyes on Jesus? So here is Peter demonstrating what it means to move forward despite our fear. But then we also know that he demonstrates what it means to allow fear to bring us back to a state of being frozen, right? A state of non-movement. He gets out of the boat, remember, even when he wasn't sure it was Jesus. Again, a big enough faith to get out of the boat. It's a great example of moving forward. But, as Peter is walking towards Jesus, what does he do? He takes his eyes off of him for a moment. And what does Peter realize? I'm walking on water. There is a storm around me. I shouldn't be able to do this. And as soon as he realizes that he should not be able to do this, what happens? He begins to sink. He begins to sink. Once he realizes that I shouldn't be able to do this, and on top of that, there's a storm around me. Now, I wouldn't suggest you get your biblical stories from Tyler Perry's Medea. If you ever see Tyler Perry's Medea and she explains this account or this story, she sort of blends stories together. And so she says that Peter was distracted by the whale eating Jonah and Noah and on a cruise ship. but anyways, but I think about that every time I read this story, that comedy. But anyways, but Peter sees this storm around him. And he knows that he himself doesn't have the ability to walk on water. And so he begins to sink. And so as this is happening, of course, he pleads to Jesus, help me. And so what does Jesus do? He immediately reaches out his hand. So I would imagine that most likely he has walked pretty far towards Jesus. Enough and possibly for Jesus to just simply reach his hand out to him. So think about that. You're on this journey and you're almost there. And yet, for just one measly moment, you realize, I shouldn't be able to do this. This shouldn't be possible. Don't we feel that way sometimes? Don't we do that? Don't we sabotage ourselves sometimes? And we would be so close to our goal, and then we realize, man, I shouldn't be able to do this. I shouldn't have gotten this far. And then we remember the storm. We remember the storm. Jesus reaches his hand out to him, and then he tells him, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" See, the number one killer of moving forward is doubt. But see, here's the problem. We often doubt ourselves. And here's the reality. We should doubt ourselves. We should doubt ourselves. Because if it was up to us to make a way for us to move forward, then yeah, we should doubt ourselves. When it comes to our relationship with Jesus, and it comes to Jesus being the center of our universe, the center of everything, and in every way in which we move is our ability through Jesus, through the Spirit, then if we put the awesome responsibility on us to move forward, then yeah, we should doubt. What happened? Peter didn't doubt himself necessarily. He doubted Jesus. He doubted God in the flesh. He doubted that Jesus can carry him through this. So the number one killer of moving forward is doubt. Fear is doubt. When we give in to our fears and we allow our fears to suddenly cause us to stop moving forward to Jesus or not moving forward to him at all, we're basically saying to God, you can't do this for me. Think about that. When we say things like, I don't know if God can save me, we're basically saying that God doesn't have the ability to save my soul from damnation. We're talking about the God that rose from the dead. And we're saying that God can't save us? That's illogical. But yet we play into that often, right? We say things just like that when it comes to God. When it comes to our ability to move, we say, you know what, I doubt God can do it. Fear is simply nothing more than doubt, and Peter gave into that doubt. And Jesus calls him out and says, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? The temptation for us is to stand still and not move forward. The temptation is also for us to, once we begin momentum, to eventually pause and believe that the fear is just too great for us to continue to move forward. But Jesus crumples that. God crumples that and says, if you would just believe in me and take a chance on me and get out of the boat. So really that's our challenge. We got to have enough faith in God that we can get out of any boat and walk towards him. The boat represents the world. The boat represents stagnation. The boat represents us building a house on fear. And getting out of that house, getting out of that boat is basically saying, God, I trust you. I depend on you. As long as I keep my eyes on you, I can walk through anything. The storm is all of those doubts and fears that keep us in the boat. But as long as we keep our eyes on Jesus, we can accomplish anything. All we got to do is get out of the boat and move forward to Jesus. That is what it means to be a follower of Jesus. We got to move forward to him, with him, and for him. So here's a challenge for you this week. As you contemplate on this simple message of what it means to move forward, despite our fears, despite the terrors that are out there, here's some questions that you need to ask yourself when contemplating on those fears that you had, those anxieties, those terrors. Ask yourself, first of all, how's my faith? How's my faith? Is my faith big enough? Or do I need to develop it more? Do I need to work on my faith more? I think all of us still need to work on our faith more. But if you're struggling with getting out of the boat, then the first question you need to ask yourself is, do I really have my faith in Jesus? Is it really built on him? Or is it built on my abilities or the abilities of others? How's my faith? That's the first question. The second question is, does my faith outweigh my fear? For some of us, maybe, if we're honest, maybe it doesn't every moment. Maybe there's some areas in which we struggle in our faith, and therefore we have so many fears in certain areas of life. How's my faith, and does my faith outweigh my fear? And then, will I truly sink when God is with me? That logical question of, is God going to allow me to fail? I think the obvious answer to us is no, of course he wouldn't. But yet, we still sometimes live lives as if we do it God's way, we'll fail, we'll sink. When that's not the reality. The reality is God will get us through any pitfall. He'll get us through any storm. But we have to believe that He can do it. And we have to, again, get out of the boat. How's my faith? Does my faith outweigh my fear? Will I truly sink when God is with me? How big is our faith? I hope this lesson helps you in some way, and that this challenge this week of really contemplating on those fears that are keeping us from moving forward with Jesus, I hope that we can develop such a faith, like Peter, we can begin to walk with Jesus despite the storms that we face. May God bless you, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us. We hope and pray that our messages are encouraging and are uplifting and are helpful in your walk with God. To get more information and more content for your journey with God, we want to encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also join us on Facebook and like our page there, and you'll get all of our messages, our Bible classes, and any other messages that might come down our pipe as we continue to create and try to share God's Word. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.